David, are you on the call, able to unmute?
Yeah, I think so. I can hear.
Yes, I can. Okay. Do you want me to share out, David and Rob, or were you guys planning on sharing out? I've got the deck right here if we want to start.
Rob?
Yeah, if you could share it out.
Okay, cool. All right. So next up, we have David James, who is the Director of Engineering for Configuration Manager. Do you want to do a quick intro, David?
Yeah, Director of Engineering of Configuration Manager.
There we go. Awesome.
I've been at Microsoft for, let's see, almost 2 decades, mostly working on Configuration Manager. I did run a part of Intune engineering for 3 years in the middle there, my sabbatical. And I also now run Desktop Analytics and parts of Intune. And I also brought with me someone to do all the hard work. So Rob, who didn't make it on this slide, but Rob, you want to introduce yourself too?
Sure, thanks, David. My name is Rob York. I'm a PM on the Microsoft Endpoint Manager team. I focus mostly on Configuration Manager and our cloud attached scenarios. So CMG, co-management, tenant attach, they're all me.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Rob, for joining us short notice.
All right, awesome. So what we're planning on doing here is we're going to be answering Q&A questions throughout the live event. So be sure to add your questions there. But we also had some pre-event questions going out through a Microsoft form. So we're going to kind of do a mix of both of those. So let's go ahead and go next. Now, Rob, I know that you added a few of these additional slides at the beginning. Was this just some different areas where you saw a lot of questions that you wanted to kind of do a quick overview on some of these things coming out?
Yeah, David and I thought we'd just kind of talk about the 2006 TP release that went out last week and some of the cool stuff that's in there. A lot of it addressed some of the questions that were in the pre-read. So yeah, I just thought I'd quickly talk through them. The first one is we've been working on this for a little while. We've had a couple of customers running some private previews of this, and we launched it into our tech preview last week, is to be able to use the company portal on co-managed devices. So for those of you that are familiar with Intune and application deployment and the end user interface for MDM enrolled devices, you're probably familiar with the company portal. For those that are more familiar with ConfigMgr, you'll be familiar with Software Center. And as we've been working through our co-managed and tenant attached scenarios, we've been consolidating a lot of the admin experiences and bringing ConfigMgr and Intune together into that Microsoft Endpoint Manager world. And this is really the end user direction here, is to be able to allow you to have a single pane of glass for your end users through the company portal. This one definitely came up in the pre-read questions as well. So we've been making a number of changes, and there's a question later on where we'll talk about remote working and learnings that we've taken from COVID. But especially in our upcoming 2006 release, we really pivoted to focus on enabling remote working. Some of it was initial documentation that we took early on in the pandemic. Some of it was code that we were going to have to take in a future version. So hopefully some of the changes that we've got coming in 2006 will enable you and your customers to be able to manage their end users in the remote scenarios that pretty much everyone's working in at the moment. But also we wanted to take that stance so that if this ever happens again, customers are in a really good position. So there's a number of changes that we made to CMG with regards to AAD authentication. There's a known issue at the moment where if you are on the corporate network and talking to a CMG, you may fail to get user policy for AAD joined devices. That's going to be fixed in upcoming 2006. And then also just improvements to task sequences and improving the ability to run task sequences over CMG. So over the past few releases, we've been slowly chipping past few tech preview releases, that is, we've been slowly chipping away at the remaining scenarios to allow task sequences to run scenarios, including things like with boot images, including the new token registration and token auth that we added in our 2002 release, and just closing a few of the gaps to make CMG and task sequences really work natively together.
Yeah, I would say within the pre-questions, I'd say we probably had at least about 10 questions around task sequences over the internet with CMG. So definitely some good improvements there. Okay. The VPN boundary?
Yeah, VPN boundary. So somehow I became the de facto Microsoft expert on VPN. I wrote a quick blog early on in the pandemic, and I've been fielding very specific implementation questions about VPN ever since. But we've also been able to take some changes in our upcoming 2006 just to try and help you manage those devices that have that kind of dual identity of, well, they're on the VPN, but they're on the internet, and traditionally ConfigMgr would detect that that client is on the intranet. And we know ConfigMgr admins and network admins don't necessarily always get along, and maybe even don't talk in some cases. So it can be very difficult to maintain boundary information for your VPN. Even within MSIT, it was a big, huge effort that they undertook a few months ago to try and improve the ability to detect whether a ConfigMgr managed machine was connected to the VPN. So in our 2005 TP, we took a number of changes to add auto detect VPN. If the VPN is using PPTP and it's connected, that should be enough. But we know that there's a number of interesting VPN providers out there that do some very interesting things. So what we did is we've added in our 2006 TP, and should hopefully be in our 2006 release later in the coming weeks, the ability to specify a connection name and a connection description, so that when the client does its content lookup, it can pass the information about the connected network adapters, so that we can do some string matching to see whether the client is on the VPN. And if you just click through, you can see what that looks like in our 2006 TP. And this is in the documentation, but just to make it nice and visually, if you click the next again, so you can just see how those map. All you need to do is do an IP config on a device, and the name there is highlighted in red, and the description there is highlighted in blue. This one definitely came up. So CMG support for endpoint protection policies. There's a number of scenarios where we're using GPO to set certain security policies, and that doesn't work in a disconnected environment. So we've taken some changes in our 2006 TP to allow endpoint protection policies to be applied for those remote devices. Just trying to improve the tenant attach onboarding. So we know some customers want to be able to import apps. So starting in 2006, you'll be able to import an app. We still think that it's the better experience is just to let us create the app and move forward, because we create all the apps with the necessary permissions. But if you have a delegated infrastructure and your global admin wants you to have that created elsewhere, you now can. This is a really big one. We've been talking about this back and forth for at least a couple of years, not really knowing how to create the right balance between allowing the upgrades to occur on a metered internet connection and not giving your end users bill shock. Hopefully now in our 2005 and a couple of improvements in our 2006 TP, hopefully we've struck that right balance so that you can still get your clients updated when you do your production upgrades, but also not giving your users bill shock if they are on those metered connections. And then a fairly interesting one that was in our latest TP to allow you to say never reboot on devices. Absolutely is not really our recommended default, but we know that there are certain industries that really want to have delegated control to some form of the end user as to when a device restarts. One of the big areas we see this is in production lines, where if one machine in the middle reboots outside of what's permitted by the line foreman, it can be very, very costly to that organization. So we see this a lot in manufacturing, and that's now in our 2006 TP. And then just to click through, and I stupidly kicked off my tech preview bench upgrade, so I'll have to use a slightly different demo. But back at Ignite last year, we announced our tenant attach scenario where you can connect your on-prem ConfigMgr environment to Intune. We see this as really the point where you start to benefit from the new Microsoft Endpoint Manager that we announced as well at Ignite. And we released our tenant attach in 2002. where you can connect your ConfigMgr environment to Intune and start to sync up devices. There was a small number of actions that we made available in the 2002 release, and we've been slowly working through. If you're following TPs, you'll have seen all the various features that we've been adding into that 10 attached scenario. Timeline, if you just go back to the slide, just then timeline is probably one of the most interesting ones and the ones that we've seen the most amount of feedback and questions around. We're gearing up to our private preview to get this out there with customers. And if I just can take control, I'll just run through a couple of the other scenarios that we've got in.
Sure, yeah, I think you should be able to click share. There we go.
So as I say, I stupidly kicked off my TP upgrade and it's taken a little bit longer than I expected. So we're using the preview UI, whereas my actual bench is using the full Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center, so forgive me. But we've got a number of different things in various previews. All of these are in tech preview. So if you've got a tech preview environment and you connect it to an Intune tenant, you can actually go try these out. So one of the first things that we shipped was the client details node. So being able to surface up information, and a lot of this information is coming up through the real-time client notification channel. So I can see things like the currently logged on user, whether they're connected on the internet, crucially whether they're online or not, and some other information. And this will refresh up to every 5 minutes, depending on changes on the client. And then some additional information like being able to see the boundary groups that the client currently resides in, again, using that BGB channel to surface up that information. Skip over timeline because I showed you the screenshot. But being able to show the collections. And a lot of these scenarios, in fact, all of these scenarios are geared towards the help desk persona. So you can start having that single pane of glass for your help desk or service desk employees so that they can find information about a device and to aid troubleshooting. So being able to see the list of collections is useful if you're using collections for your application or some form, or you're targeting within your organization. And then also applications. So again, one of the big pieces of feedback we heard as we were talking to customers about that help desk persona is that a large portion of help desk time is spent installing software for users. Even organizations that leverage things like Software Center to have user-driven installations of software, they still see a large portion of call volume to the help desk to go install software. So being able to use the APIs that are already built into ConfigMgr, but just surfacing up those user-targeted and machine-targeted apps that require approval. You see all of these are actually installed on this device, but if this application wasn't installed, I could go click install, and that installation would occur in real time and be installed within a matter of minutes on the device. And then we get into some really cool stuff. So CM Pivot, you may be familiar with CM Pivot on-prem, but we've lifted this UI up to the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center. And we're in really early private previews with a couple of customers right now, just validating that the architecture works and that it works in a timely fashion. But again, being able to give this to your help desk to be able to pull back information that would normally take minutes, if not hours, to get a not so tech literate user to go through. So I can just type ipconfig, and you'll see what's happening now is we're going back down to the ConfigMgr on-prem, down to the site server, and then the site server is sending out the instruction out through the management point or CMG that the client is connected to. And within a couple of seconds, we should get details back about the IP state of this device. And this is actually one of my engineers' test devices, one of their dev benches. So it's sat in Hyper-V. But you can see very quickly that we can get information back. And cleverer people than me can write much more advanced queries, but I just stick to individual single commands. Again, we can go get information about the device, and this is all in TP and should be coming to a current branch environment near you very soon. And then finally, one that we've been working on as well. We've got one of the rockstar interns on the team working on this, is lifting up the run scripts functionality into the cloud as well. So just bringing that functionality. Again, feedback we saw that help desk and service desk use pre-canned scripts created by the higher level admins within the organization. So being able to run those scripts in real time. You see this one ran before, but I can just hit run and the script goes off and runs, and we get notifications native into the Azure portal through Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center. And very quickly, I'm going to get that output back. It's a very simple output on this one, so it's quick. But being able to use those scripts to, again, facilitate troubleshooting and sometimes reactive remediation from the help desk perspective.
All right. Was that it for the demo there?
Yeah, let's jump over to the questions.
All righty. Yeah, that what Rob just went over, that's definitely answered quite a few of the questions that we got. So great stuff there. Alrighty, so jumping into questions. So we did have a pre-event survey, so we got 105 questions for David on that. We can kind of see some of the topics that came up throughout those as well. So let's just jump right in. So here's one for you, David. So what's the difference between Microsoft Endpoint Management Configuration Manager and Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager? Bit of a marketing nightmare. I don't know what to use within the org.
I feel like, Justin, you put this in just to get me warmed up on passionate conversations. The way I think about it is Microsoft Endpoint Management is a big product and brand name that covers Configuration Manager and Intune and other things. And then Configuration Manager historically has been a product that was part of System Center. So it used to be System Center Configuration Manager, but now we just call it Configuration Manager. And as part of the bigger picture, Microsoft Endpoint Management. So I always say Microsoft Endpoint Management Configuration Manager because it's the combination of two things. And in our product UI, someone thought that saying Microsoft Endpoint Management Configuration Manager was too wordy, so they took one of the managers out. And so in our UI, it says Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager, but MECM to me doesn't make sense because it's MEM, Microsoft Endpoint Management, and it's Configuration Manager. So I always say MEMCM, but it doesn't matter because we don't have any official branding that is the acronym, nor do we reference the acronym anywhere in our UI. The acronym for me is just a useful keyword on Twitter because Twitter likes short text. So I always use the hashtag MEMCM on Twitter.
But I think
Rob, anything you want to add, Rob?
You search on both hashtags. I know I do. So,
out of a point of emphasis, I intentionally never search for MECM. I search for #configman all the time, and I search for #memcm, but that's it.
All right, so talking about hashtags, so if you sharing anything out, so VSMUG would be for this event, so don't forget that as well. Cool. All right, so next question. You guys are doing a ton of stuff with Cloud Attach, a lot of new features. So here's one from Adam Cook. Why should I Cloud Attach in my environment right now?
Yeah, so historically, we've looked at ConfigMgr, we've looked at Intune, and for a decade, there's kind of been this effort at Microsoft to lift workloads to the cloud. And oftentimes that's been about taking things that already worked well and putting them in the cloud. And where at Microsoft we didn't do well is if we said, if our goal was getting you to the cloud was to get you back to where you already were, there wasn't enough value sometimes for a lot of the change. That the value would be simplification, less on-prem hardware, maybe different expense structures, but where we made that mistake in ConfigMan and Intune is if the goal for Intune was you were able to move your management to the cloud, but maybe you lost some features in it, and if you're lucky you got back to where you started, that wasn't enough value. And what we pivoted to the last couple of years is Cloud Attach for us, or Tenant Attach, which probably is a terrible name from a customer point of view. It made sense for us internally engineering, but is about if you already have a ConfigMan hierarchy and installation and it's working well and it's giving you value, what can you do if you attach it to the cloud? What can you get that's new? What can you get that's new value? And for me, that's a lot of the stuff that Rob started this with, which is, okay, people have been asking for a web UI forever. Web UI has always been problematic for me because it's so expensive to go look at it. But is there certain persona-based UIs that made sense to be ubiquitously available in the cloud? And we started with help desk. So one immediate value you get is now you can get a ubiquitous, available anywhere cloud UI that works on any, on cross-platform, including iOS, and get access to some ConfigMan functionality. So that's one of the immediate values. The second one, which we're barely starting to tease with some of the stuff we shipped last week, is what we call Endpoint Analytics. ConfigMan, I was looking at telemetry, all the databases combined across all the tenants is something like 500 ecobytes of information. That data is a lot of data that when we, if we learn how to reason on that data and get insights from it, we can bring back to customers. But the amount of compute or the amount of, engine that is required to do that level of analytics is not what people would be running or maintaining on-prem. So to me, it's those two big values is, with tenant attached, we're going to light up some very focused help desk scenarios short term, including, like Rob demoed, real-time CM pivot from a web UI down to a device, and a lot of analytics and insights, what my peer Jason Gibbons likes to call insights-driven IT. Rob?
Yeah, no, you covered it. The headline is tenant attach makes the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center the cloud UI for Config Manager. It will ship functionality in slices. David likes to talk about how the 2012 UI took 300 years of people effort to go build, which depending on the size of your team is 3 to 7 years. So we took the decision to not wait 3 to 7 years to go ship the functionality in the cloud and take it in slices and iterate on it. But the functionality, when you do tenant attach, that basically is the architecture that will facilitate us building that cloud UI for you over the next however many releases. And some of that is us syncing data into the cloud so that it's there instant. But some data in Config Manager is either too volatile or too large to make sense for us to sync, because we run the risk of it getting out of sync and not being the latest data. So the functionality that I just showed with things like CM pivot and client details, us being able to fetch that data on demand and show it within a matter of seconds is really powerful. And there's some, as you saw, there's some cool stuff coming, and there'll be more cool stuff coming down the line as we progress through the year and into 2021.
Yeah, and the other thing too is when you think about MEM or Microsoft Endpoint Manager, it's really part of a bigger suite or brand, although those words are wrong, around Microsoft 365. And what the power of the cloud lets us do is connect multiple Microsoft products together in interesting scenarios on behalf of the customer. So for example, ATP and MEM together. Now, ConfigMan and Intune together may understand, IT intent about apps being deployed, settings being deployed, when they should be deployed, what's compliant and what's not compliant. But Defender ATP has concepts of vulnerabilities and threats. And now if you merge these data sets together, you might get insights like, when was this vulnerability in my environment and who might have been exposed to it based on who was running apps when on what device, right? And so that amount of data that we can join cross-product on behalf of the customer and learn and bring those insights back to the customer across multiple products, that's something that Microsoft, we could never really do before when we're on-prem. But now, by connecting some of these scenarios together in the name of, say, Microsoft 365, you'll see new scenarios that are more powerful. And that's really intriguing. So that's some of the further down the road kind of integrations that you'll see coming.
All right, so we got a couple in the Q&A in Teams related to upgrading to 2002. So basically, should we hold off till 2006 of Config Manager, or should we go ahead and upgrade now?
I never say you should hold off. You should always upgrade.
I knew that was going to be a quick one for you. All righty, so next one from the survey. So you're facing a lot of issues with work from home. how are you guys developing and or thinking about functionality and new features based on the new environment here?
Yeah, well, a couple things. One thing that because of COVID and we've been work from home basically since February, and that means I haven't been able to travel and visit user groups or conferences or even customers. One thing that is really core on our team and our culture and the way we do engineering is really trying to understand customers' perspective, being in their environments and seeing their challenges. Because if I let you in on a little secret, engineers don't really understand the product very well. They know the code from the inside out, not always the outside in. And we build the product much better when we're able to walk in the customer's shoes and see things from their perspective. So work from home has been interesting for us because it's accelerated our own learning and empathy around how hard it is to do things over the internet and some of the product challenges that we've had. And so that focus for us as a team, combined with kind of the worldwide need of everybody or many companies starting to work from home, created an opportunity for us to repivot very quickly to after understanding some of those problems with our own product, accelerating innovation around it. And I can't remember off the top of my head, Rob, but it seems like 2/3 of what you showed at the start of this was repivots that we had done to kind of focus on work from home. And there are some short-term, I remember making this list in March of all the investments that we could go do, and there was some short-term victories that we knew we could go do, and 2006 is actually pretty amazing that we got a lot of those in, especially since we all were working from home during the coding of that release. But there's also some longer-term ones that we're looking at that may be possibilities that we can get to later. Rob, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we've been slowly chipping away at a lot of the scenarios that enable work from home. So CMG is a great example. A lot of customers that had already deployed CMG and had got that working, literally said to us, "Hey, I'm so glad that we did this. We just kind of sat back and users went home and it didn't matter. Everyone was ready to go." Some other customers were kind of scrambling to catch up. We've seen a huge surge in those technologies. We've also been adding and improving on things like AAD authentication and just building that natively into the product. That's kind of, I'm quite proud of the effort that I've done over the past couple of years to kind of push that and drive that. So there was some stuff that was already in flight, and then as Dave says, we kind of pivoted on a couple of things. VPN was not really on our radar to go do, but we started having those conversations and seeing that real pain and something that we could go solve. So yeah, from that side of things, we definitely pivoted. From an internal perspective, I think as with any organization, everyone being remote definitely has its challenges, but I think we've weathered the storm reasonably well. The majority of our test infrastructure is hosted in Azure and in VMs. The OSD team were kind of scrabbling to figure out how to do testing, and it's hard for them because it has to be physical. But I think we've done a reasonable job at keeping the lights on, and pretty excited about the 2006 release because, as I say, there's a lot of stuff that should really help customers in the current circumstances.
All right, next one from the Q&A in Teams from Ryan H. Do you plan improvements for orchestration groups, such as the ability to pause them, make them only run for certain deployments, or allow them to run for definition updates?
Let's see, yes, no, maybe. Yeah, definitely pausing is something that is being discussed. We built the architecture because the need to do orchestration groups is really about real-time control of patching and real-time orchestration. And so the ability to start or pause is something that we've architected in. We just need to finish the last mile on it. Being able to do it per deployment is problematic because the way that we architected it wasn't that orchestration groups were a concept of the deployment, they're a concept of the machine, which means anything targeted at that machine, especially for patching, is orchestrated. And it's unlikely that we would switch from that. Now, definition updates is something that we need to go look at. Yeah, if I remember how it works, if I remember correctly, right now it orchestrates definition updates, which probably we'd like to be able to opt out of that. So it's something, we finally moved the needle significantly in orchestration groups just recently, and now you'll see us kind of innovate a little bit on this going forward for the first time since 1602. So keep the feedback coming. We're looking at how to make it work for you.
All right, so next one is about desktop analytics. So there are a few kind of related to this with some of the features that have been deprecated around like blue screens and crashes. So any thoughts on this question, David?
Yeah, it's coming back. So hold tight over the next, hopefully 3 months, and you'll see us light up scenarios related to device health and crashes and driver health and crashes. And this goes back to the comment on the power of or cloud attaching. There are scenarios now where, because we are collecting around crashing and joining that to other scenarios and data, that we'll be able to bring you a lot of insights into your environment health.
All right, so this one was probably one of the most popular, and I know we also have some similar ones on the Teams Q&A as well. So basically remote control over the internet. I know in some previous events you had said there's some private previews going on. Any thoughts about that for any of these?
Yeah, I guess what I'd say is we do have a technology here. We're not ready to ship it. We're looking for more feedback on it. There's some constraints around it. For example, we had to get authentication over the internet working. But if you are very interested in this and willing to work with us on deploying it in production as a private preview and you have Microsoft Field, have them reach out to us. But it's something we're working on. We're not yet committed to shipping it because we haven't solved all the problems related to it, but we've made a lot of progress the last few years.
Yeah, and I'd also encourage people that want features that are in TP but haven't shipped to current branch. If you don't have TP or you haven't provided feedback on it, then that's part of the reason that we're not shipping. We use the TP feedback and we use that for ensuring that the feature works and that it's going to meet customers' needs. So even if you try something and it works perfectly in TP, just send a smile in the console, because that one smile could genuinely help tip the decision when we're looking at, hey, is this ready? If we say, well, we've seen positive feedback, we know it's working. It's very difficult if we've had zero feedback. We're probably going to assume the worst and make sure that we're iterating on it. So
yeah,
it's good general practice anyway, just to have a TP lab. You can run it in a very small VM. It doesn't need to be anything big or shiny. It can run in a VM on your Windows 10 laptop if needs be. So yeah, get a TP environment and go use it.
All right, so here is one coming from Twitter. Do you think you'll get the ability at some point where you might be able to display devices in some sort of organized grouping rather than clicking devices and seeing them all? So I assume they're talking about the devices node there. Do you see any changes potentially in that view, or would you generally use collections for that type of filtering?
Rob, do you have thoughts on this?
I'd need to know this. Like, are we talking MDM enrolled? Are we talking co-managed, tenant attached? All of the above. Be good to see more information on really just kind of what version you'd like to see there.
Alrighty, so we'll see if we get a reply for that. All right, so this is one that I know you had talked about a little bit in the past, David. So will there be active anytime, and will that require getting rid of inboxes for high availability?
So first of all, it doesn't require getting rid of inboxes. It does bypass them in some cases so that we can support the new HA active architecture. We don't yet have a timeline on this, but the engineer that's been working on this, has been doing HA and CAS collapse, and we think CAS collapse might finally be done and shipped. But every release, he iterates the functionality for HA and active. know there's some more improvements in 2006 that get us closer to active, but don't yet light it up. So it's a work in progress.
All right, so I know this is one that you get a lot, dark mode in the console. So what do you think about when you see that request, that user voice, whether or not it might come?
I think, let's see. A few years ago, I think I saw a demo of it mostly working. So I thought it was close. And then I think that there's some challenges to that. As I get older, I realize the importance of being able to not look at white all the time. So I think just in the name of my own health, we're going to have to ship it sometime. We don't have a timeline yet on it, but there has been code that prototyped it working. So.
Right, so from the Q&A, will hardware inventory be available over CMG? I want to say that works. Any thoughts or feedback there, Rob or David?
It should just work.
Yeah, okay. I thought that would work. Okay, awesome. All right, let's go next.
We have some other features that don't work over CMG, but we're closing those down.
Awesome. Okay, so user deployment. So it doesn't look like you can deploy applications through user collections over CMG if they are not hybrid AD joined. Is that correct? If not, will there be better docs or will it get changed in the future?
So this is really a factor of the authentication. Just making sure I understand the constraints, because there's different ways this question could go. But yeah, if a device is not hybrid Azure AD joined, i.e. it doesn't have an identity plane in the cloud, then if it's disconnected from the infrastructure, if it doesn't have line of sight to the domain controller, it's not going to be able to do the user level authentication to get policy. I
gotta imagine that's probably related to the CMG MP being out in Azure and not, joined over the domain where it would typically do that type of authentication. Rob, does that sound about right?
Well, it's not even a factor of our infrastructure. It's a factor of not being able to see the domain controller. So the domain controller needs to be able to authenticate the user. What we have done, and it was one of the cards that I had in the first couple of slides, is starting in the 2006 TP, so hopefully it'll be in 2006, if the user is in a hybrid state. So, with more and more scenarios that we have, need the user to be in that hybrid state. And it's one of the principles that we also took with, for example, tenant attach. Tenant attach doesn't require any AAD presence for the device, but really the users do need to be in that state. So what we mean by that is it's an Active Directory sourced user that is synchronized up using AAD Connect, and it has a presence in Azure Active Directory. And then also you need to configure AAD and AD, both AAD and AD user discovery in the ConfigMgr environment. So basically it syncs up to the cloud, and then ConfigMgr is able to sync them back down and merge those records so that we have that tie in ConfigMgr between AD and AAD. Starting in 2006, if the user is in that state but is logged onto a non-hybrid device, so let's just use Windows 7 as an example, because that just can't be hybrid. If the user is online on the internet talking to CMG, Software Center will prompt for credentials. They'll get an AAD prompt and they can re-authenticate. So they won't get single sign-on, but it should unblock those scenarios. The simplest solution would be to hybrid AAD join all your devices, but I know that can be a long pull for some organizations. So hopefully this is a good interim stopgap.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if that question's from Johan that we know, but there's an implication of that question that I don't know that we need to follow up on. It kind of implies you can't do targeting to users in the admin UI, irrespective of the client side. Definitely, we have auth issues, but we've improved it in 2006, so that you don't have to join the device; just the user has to AAD auth. But it's something we continue to look at.
All right, so question from Teams. So what is a CAS collapse? So that's basically a feature where if you were using a central administration site and you wanted to collapse down to a single primary, you'll have like a migration path. Any thoughts on that, David, or is that pretty much sum it up?
It's not really migration. Like it's in the process we have it turned off for all the customers because basically it's a switch that lets you get rid of your CAS. You don't have to migrate, it just throws your CAS away and then you just are up and running on your primary. For the last couple releases, because of how critical it was that had no issues, we required you to call support and they would help you turn on that switch and do it with you to make sure it worked. I don't know if we were changing that behavior for 2006 yet and going to let anyone do it without support, but it's basically built into the product. And if you want to get rid of your CAS until we make it public, just call support and they'll tell you how to do it. And it's not a migration; it just throws your CAS away.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I guess migration was not the terminology there. So here's another one from the Teams Q&A. So we use IBCM and we are setting up Intune in our environment. Is there any benefit to also using CMG?
I think the benefit of CMG is it's simpler than IBCM, and new features going forward we will make sure that we plumb in CMG into and they work with CMG, but we don't add new features to IBCM. So that question is kind of two parts. Is CMG better than IBCM? If you already have IBCM working, it's fine. But new features will probably only work with CMG going forward. And then the other question is there a benefit for CMG with Intune or IBCM with Intune? And I think yes. I think if you're going to use Intune and co-management and you're going to still have the SCCM client, you either want CMG or IBCM there to make sure that you can do SCCM things or ConfigMgr things while you're on the internet.
All right, cool. Yeah, and I think the similar question came up for our CMG session earlier this month as well. One potential kind of scenario could be with everybody over VPN. With a traditional IBCM, you would most likely be hosting your distribution point somewhere like a DMZ, which would require that VPN to connect back. There could be some benefits to CMG where that would live in Azure to kind of offload some of that VPN pipe. So that's potentially where CMG could help in that scenario as well, I would think. Yeah,
and I'm trying to think. I can't think of any features that don't work over IBCM. IBCM is really just a management point. So if it's going to work for a management point on-prem, chances are it will work over the internet. One of the big advantages is, as you say, that CMG is only outbound ports. There's no inbound ports that are required, whereas internet-based client management requires inbound ports to allow those clients to connect in. So you get that high extra level of connectivity security by only needing to open the outbound ports for CMG.
Okay, we'll come back to this if we have some time. Let's go back to the next one here. All right, so this one I think was already answered here. I think you already spoke to that one, Rob, so we'll skip over that one. All right, so is there any plan as CM Pivot becomes more robust to potentially replace reporting?
Yeah, so it won't replace it. If you think about CM Pivot, the reason it won't replace it is it's reaching down to the client and grabbing information real time and pulling it back up. But that means it can reach down and grab like every single registry key or every single file, right? Or every single setting in WMI. And the reason it doesn't replace reporting is reporting lets you reason across in the database insights you have on all your devices or all your users. But you'll never have everything from every machine up in the database, right? So there's things you can do with reports that you can't do with CM Pivot and vice versa. CM Pivot is really good for either depth on a single machine or very narrow view across multiple machines real time, but it's not good at depth across multiple machines, which is what reporting is good at. Now, saying that, we are looking at what it means to align. We have our hardware inventory, we have software inventory. Hardware inventory really isn't hardware inventory, it's WMI inventory, and software inventory really isn't software inventory, it's file-based inventory. But thinking about how do we unify the concepts or objects around looking up data and inventorying data. And there isn't a aspect where CM pivot or run scripts can run against mobile machines. And for the case where the machines are offline, it pulls the data from inventory. So we're starting to align them, but I don't think it'll ever replace reporting. It might be more useful in certain scenarios, but I don't think it'll replace it.
All right, so here's one from the Q&A. So large organization with multiple IT teams and multiple config manager setups. How well can they utilize Intune connectivity in the same tenant while staying separated from their managed systems?
Yeah, it's something we have more work to do. So ConfigMan, we have role-based administration. We nickname it RBAC, and Intune also has RBAC. Those two RBAC systems aren't aligned, and even worse, they're not necessarily aligned with other things like Azure Active Directory or Advanced Threat Protection. So thinking about the right way to configure security and scope and segregate security is something that we're working on. We're trying to figure out how to align ConfigMan's RBAC concepts into Intune so that it makes sense, but we haven't shipped that yet. But for sure, our goal is multi-org, multi kind of scoping security scenarios. For sure, that's on our radar.
Yeah, and multiple config manager environments reporting into the same Intune tenant is supported for both co-management and tenant attach. It's just the other way around that we don't have in the product.
All right, so a little more context on that Twitter question that might be helpful. It looks like they're specifically talking about co-management and providing access to the service desk or other group. They have to constantly be searching for a device rather than being able to navigate.
Yeah.
Not sure if that helps at all.
No, yeah, that's after I think the question, that's what I thought was. So basically, in the Intune UI, we would like a way that is more usable than a flat device list that all you can do is search. Yeah, give us feedback. The good news about bringing ConfigMan up into this UI is there will be a lot of UI innovation up here, where we're less likely to have brand new powerful UI concepts for our older on-prem UI. So yeah, give us this feedback. Definitely, as we think through the persona of help desk, how to find the device that you need to, when someone calls that you need to help them with, that's something that we want to make as simple and as fast as possible. So give us ideas and feedback.
And I think actually that is solved with scope tags. So Intune has the concept of scope tags that allows you to bucketize groups of devices. So for co-managed devices, definitely you should be able to use scope tags. I'll respond to the Twitter thread with a link to the documentation.
Righty, will Intune ever support Chromebooks?
Oh, yeah, I did see this question. So there's nothing for us to announce yet.
All right. Quick one. Okay, so this is a pretty big one. Let's see what we're looking at here. Okay. So is there any way to look at which type of data is being sent through CMG? I think I might have a screenshot on here as well. So you can get some data by looking at the CMG, like how many connections, how much data. Any thoughts from you guys about seeing, like, was it hardware inventory that went through CMG? Was it sub scanning? Was it something else? Any thoughts, Rob or David, or if there's even anything maybe already available for that in reporting?
Yeah, I haven't thought about this yet. We've been more focused on keeping the data small and working on connectivity, get all the features working. I hadn't thought about the need to have like breakouts of the data. Rob?
CMG cost is always a little bit of a trigger for me. People that follow me on Twitter or know me know this. I really struggle with this because those numbers sound high, but that gig per month per client is, I think, like 0.8 cents per client per month. There you go. So you can see it's the most expensive it will ever be is that $0.087. So it's like less than a penny per client per month. So really the conversation shouldn't be about the cost, it's about the value that you get. So what you're saying is that for penny per client per month, you can manage all your devices on the internet and ensure that you have good compliance rates and you can get software deployed and updated. So really that's the way that I think customers should be looking at it, and I think hopefully the majority of the community agrees. I know that it's a paradigm shift for certainly the teams that manage these, if not organizations as a whole, to move to more consumption-based pricing. But if you spend so much time focusing on the raw costs when the raw costs actually just don't stack up to be anything, it's much better to look at the value that you get out of it and what that means for the business. And if that doesn't stack up within an organization, then internet-based client management also achieves the same thing. So you can go and spin up a DP and put it into your DMZ and manage it that way. And it's interesting because that's not free either. You know, someone is paying for that traffic to go to your MP and DP that you host in a DMZ. It's not free. So yeah, I know cost is top of mind for some customers. Fortunately, it's becoming less and less of an issue. You know, there's some really good community resources. I think Justin, you just showed the blog that Johan is maintaining, where he's collecting real world samples of the cost of CMG. But yeah, there is a cost associated to it, but hopefully the value that you get out of it is well outweighed or well outweighs the cost.
Awesome. So next one was about installing the client directly on an internet-based machine. So, you know, I know some of the recent releases, 2002 came out with some pretty big improvements to help make that scenario more simple. We did include some resources that we actually did some guides on about how you can install the client directly on an internet-based machine. It goes into a bit more about the options. Any thoughts about bulk token that came out, David? I know you guys shipped that. And that really does make things quite a bit more simple, especially for a machine that's kind of born on the internet. If you're not using something like Intune, you can still do that without really complex certificate requirements. Yeah,
in fact, I'm defer to Rob.
Yeah, to be honest, you've covered it there with your links, Justin. It just works. It's worked ever since, I think it was like TP 1706. Actually, no, it's worked ever since TP 1707. We found a lot of issues in TP 1706, but this scenario works. As I announced at Ignite in November, we're working on better integration to make Autopilot into ConfigMgr and co-management work, just so that you can have like a true modern provisioning into co-management. And there should be some streamlining that comes as part of that for provisioning of the client. But yeah, essentially it just works. If you've got a CMG, it also works with an internet-based client management point. But yeah, you just run CCM setup.msi and it bootstraps the client and it can be bought on the internet. The easiest way is to use AAD. If you're using AAD authentication, just onboard the ConfigMgr site to the AAD tenant so that AAD auth works, and it just works. Bulk token is another way of doing it, but there's a lot more overhead there. The tokens only last for a couple of days, so you'd be constantly having to replace the tokens, but that would work as well if you needed to go down that route. But AAD is definitely the way to go for the most seamless authentication mechanism for bootstrapping the client.
Right, so I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on this one. So somewhat recently, if DO is enabled, it can cause third-party updates downloading over CMG on the internet to fail. So we actually did a blog post about this a little more. Any thoughts on that? You know, if there might be a fix at some point, or would this be?
I think they're looking at the options here. I think the challenge, just so you know, the code that's doing the download is Windows itself. And so, but yeah, my team's looking at what the options are here.
All right, so quite a few questions about bare metal and task sequence type deployments. I know you covered that quite a bit at the beginning, Rob. Would you say that covered pretty much everything that you guys are kind of in the works for improving OSD over the internet?
Yeah, most of the scenarios should be there. Personally, I struggle with some of the scenarios for rebuild. I think Autopilot is, it's intended as a born on the internet scenario, but certainly some of the rebuild scenarios, especially in the remote working world, help desk saying, "Oh, we need to rebuild your machine." If you can kick that off from Software Center, I think I can see some value in it. But yeah, all those scenarios should work. So yeah, just have a look at the TP docs, and hopefully most of that will make it into 2006. So keep an eye out for the release there.
So yeah, next. Oh, go ahead.
I think this morning I saw an email. Maybe it was from Dal and MVP who had tried like OSD end to end on the internet over CMG. Probably a blog's coming. But yeah, I think we're moving the needle a little bit. Every release on it.
All right. So next one coming up from the Q&A. Will CM Pivot be released for Intune only devices?
Yes, eventually. We have some architecture we have to build and invest there before that could work.
All right, so there's this is basically a ton of community options out there to improve the experience, things like servicing, notifications. Basically the question is there any plans to adopt functionality, or one of the fun points that I saw here, or hire them so they can incorporate it into ConfigMgr?
Yeah, so I think the top three I know pretty well. So, I think this is actually one of the strengths of the ConfigMgr product is there is just a vast community of people that are innovating and adding on to it and making it better. I missed out on the opportunity to talk to Maurice during March when MVP week was kind of not local here in Redmond, but I talk with them about drivers all the time. I started to learn more about Donna's solution around OSD and on the whims. We never, that's not the right way to say it. It's unlikely for us just to go like acquire one of these and merge them. What's more likely is that we allow them to continue to innovate at a speed and agility that often my team can't do. And that we've listened to the community on the most needed features via user voice and feedback, and then we add them. But the driver solution is an interesting one, because what we're trying to do to fix drivers actually isn't in ConfigMgr, it's in Windows itself and in the way that we do patching and the way that OEMs ship drivers. So Maurice and his crew have a good solution for tactically dealing with the challenge. But what we're trying to do is actually fix drivers in Windows. And so we're trying to make longer term bets there and make investments. And oftentimes I think that's where Microsoft does better is looking at the bigger, longer term strategic investments, including how we need to change Windows for things to work. And the community does really good at closing kind of last mile on features that could be better and providing that content. But we're always listening to feedback.
All right, so I actually did an answer for this one. Basically, this was one that came up a few times about CRL checking with CMG. So there's a few options there. Basically, if you're using an internal PKI for your client certs and you aren't using things like Azure AD authentication or a bulk token, if you have the option on CMG that it needs to check the client certs, basically the big factor there is on your internal Active Directory PKI, you need to make sure you have a public CRL list, like using HTTP, that the CMG server can hit. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to check the revocation, or the other option would be to disable that checking. Obviously, there can be some concerns there if you ever revoked a cert, but there is a YouTube video that specifically talks about the different revocation options for both the CMG checking the client, as well as the client checking the CMG certificate, which is why Microsoft generally recommends going with like a public certificate authority within the CMG docs, just to make sure you do have that public revocation that the clients can always hit when they're on the internet. Any additional thoughts on that, or do you think that's covered pretty well?
Yeah, no, I think you've covered that.
All right, so multiple MCM hierarchies are supported within Desktop Analytics, but multiple workspaces inside one Azure tenant are still not possible. Any roadmap on that?
I don't know what this question means. I don't know what multiple workspaces means.
All right, so if you're watching, just tweet us out just a bit more information on the context of that question, and we'll see what we can do there. All right, let's take a look. So this was a pretty common one, I would say, with a lot more user installations, things like Zoom, for example, and other products that kind of default where a user can just go download them. Is there any improvements or things that you guys are thinking about on making hardware inventory within the user profile, HKey current user, any more easy within ConfigMgr today?
Yeah, so this one's interesting, and I spoke to this a little bit earlier, but just the question itself, if you pause on the question, is kind of ironic. Like, can we improve hardware inventory so that we can inventory user apps? Well, the fact that we have to use hardware inventory to inventory apps, I think, is already a little bit broken. So we are greatly improving our ability to inventory and detect and track apps, but we're not going to do it in hardware inventory. Hardware inventory is a system that was designed in the 90s so that we could tell how much RAM a machine had, and we've kind of evolved it because it was so flexible. But its latency of maybe collecting only once a week, or the size of what it can collect, many people have it set at 5 megabytes, which is really small, is not a good solution for one of the most important things you want to track, which is applications and how fast they can change and the number that customers will have. So the innovation that we'll do in this area will be a feature that's more focused on tracking applications, even in the user space, giving you more information about them, some analytics around them. So, and device, application health, crashing, and things like that. So, yes, we will do way better on giving customers insights into their applications, but it won't be limited to hardware inventory as the feature or the delivery mechanism.
Cool. So they're currently using ConfigMan on-prem, always on VPN. Is there any specific reason to stay relevant they would also want to use co-management with Intune?
Yeah, and this, if you look at it from a point of, I'm going to slide a workload, like I'm going to move patch to cloud, that might be interesting, but it's less interesting. What's more interesting is the added value you can get from cloud that you couldn't do without it. And like to the last question, analytics and insights will be a big part of it. A ubiquitously available web UI on any device for help desk scenarios for now it will be a part of it. Integration with other Microsoft products like ATP and shared data and IT intent is a part of it. So I think that if you look at co-management as I'm going to start at A and I'm going to get back to A when I slide my workload, it just seems like a lot of work. You really have to look at the added value you'd get in insights or cross-product scenarios, or in one UI with multiple devices from multiple products.
Yeah, and it goes back. So the phrase we use internally is cloud value. Like, we don't want customers to feel that they have to move to the cloud for some arbitrary reason. It's connect to the cloud and get the value that makes sense for your business. So, for some customers that they don't want any on-prem software. So yeah, they're going to go move everything. For some customers, it's that they want conditional access on their Windows 10 devices. Increasingly, it's customers want to move away from OSD and they want to move to modern provisioning with Autopilot. So, we want to go build the features that give you value as an organization. And there was a question in the chat around apps and what to do with apps. We see significant numbers of customers that just don't want to move their apps because they have thousands of them on-prem in ConfigMgr and it works, but they want to go streamline other things. So, they'll continue to kind of streamline their ConfigMgr use and use Intune for things like Windows Update for Business and policy through the CSP back policies, but they intend to leave the apps in ConfigMgr for some time. And the way the workloads work with apps is that you can use both. So we're seeing customers that are considering leaving all of their existing apps in ConfigMgr and slowly moving over and adding new apps into Intune and targeting from there. So really it is about finding the strategy that allows you to have that value. And increasingly with things like the tenant attach and also the Endpoint Analytics that were released into preview last week, connecting to the cloud gives you not just a different way of doing the same things that you've always done, but also it gives you new functionality that we just couldn't give you in an on-prem solution. And I always refer to desktop analytics as a good example of that. That there's no way we could sell an on-prem solution that does what desktop analytics does. And it's the same with the endpoint analytics, because not only are we doing a lot of processing and data crunching of your own data, but then comparing it to the anonymized bigger set of data for desktop analytics, being able to give you insights specific for your environment, but based on the broader set of Windows data that we have. The example I use is, let's say you're purely one hardware manufacturer, but your CEO decides that they want a Surface Book because they saw them in PC World at the weekend and they look cool, and they bring them in on a Monday and drop it on your desk and say, make this work, and you go make it work. But then it comes to the next rollout of the next version of Windows, you don't have a device to go test that against. Desktop analytics gives you the insights to say, yeah, that device is good to go, or as with 2004, maybe hey, you might want to hold off on upgrading this just yet. So cloud value, that's the way to look at it, not just I need to go there because Microsoft said I should. We genuinely want the features to give you specific value that makes you want to enable those cloud attached scenarios.
All right, so here is one from the team's questions from Andy. Question for David: will there ever be a web admin console for on-prem users? We have no external connectivity and currently need to use the thick console. So I think that's for like a totally offline site. Do you guys foresee the Microsoft Endpoint Manager admin with Intune being the only option, or would there ever be an on-prem only in your?
Yeah, just given that there's finite resources and user voice has almost 5,000 requests, it's unlikely that we would build what's very expensive to build a UI for web for on-prem only. Now, saying that, we have, in order to get tenant attach working, we built a brand new API that UIs can be built on top of. My team calls it admin API. That is a REST-based API that would make it easy for people to build web UI on top of. So while I don't think my team would ever build a on-prem only web UI, I think that we've made it easy for other people to do it.
Yeah, just pasted in a link as well to the admin service and some of the things you can do with that API that's being developed there if you ever wanted to make your own with a bit more flexibility. Will 2006 ConfigMgr be will 2006 be the next production build, and when do you expect it to release? So any thoughts on when you guys are kind of testing, when you're doing tech previews, and then going into tap, like what's that release cadence generally look like for you guys in testing?
We've been pretty predictable, I think, for the last 5 years. 5 years ago, just under 5 years ago, we shipped the first current branch at 15.11. That was the only one not on an 02, 06, or 10 boundary. Ever since, it's been every 4 months. And if you look back, you can see the rhythm of when our 6 releases shipped. Where we're at right now is we're done coding. We're, I think, 3 weeks in on testing, which is normally a 4 to 5 week process for us. We'll start tap deployments in a couple weeks. So sometime towards the second half of next month, you probably will start seeing or hearing about it. We are a little later this time. We took a little bit of extra time to get some of the work from home scenarios that we wanted into the release. But yeah, I think you'll start seeing it in the next month or two.
Yeah, I'm just stuck at, it's a question we get in the run up to every single release. And I've just stuck one of the doc links in there that lists the availability date. There's not very much variance between availability dates. It might be a little bit later, as David says this time, but
there's one that MVPs. I don't remember which one off the top of my head, but he always predicts the date, and he has a blog out there, and he's almost accurate within a day or two every release.
Right. So let's get some context around this. So how do you recommend deploying and managing co-manage devices in ConfigMgr that has a mixture of servers, VMs, and workstations and machines that use service accounts?
Yeah.
For now, there's a pilot. Okay.
I'll answer that in a sec. David, do you want to take a chance to plug TAP in response to that last question?
Yeah, go ahead, Rob. You should plug it.
So, David, it might have been Justin. You referenced TAP. So, one of the things that we significantly invest in is our TAP program. It's a relatively archaic term in Microsoft. A lot of other groups have kind of repurposed the term TAP to be more like our CCP outreach program, but for us, TAP is our technical adoption program, and we work with a number of customers that are prepared to take our upcoming release in their production environment, and it's maybe a month ahead of certainly the fast ring release. And traditionally, normally we go on site with customers, we go all over the world, we take the release candidate bits to site, and we go and upgrade their environment, and we use that as a final stages of validation. And we're always open to new customers that want to go fast and that want to be part of our validation and have a good deep connection with the engineering team. So if you think you'd be interested and you're prepared to commit to upgrading your production environment slightly ahead of release within a very specific window that we state, you can either hit me or David up on Twitter. So it's at rob.york or at djammer with 3 M's. We can have a conversation.
Yeah, we love working with our customers. It's the most important part of us getting our quality right, and especially our TAP customers that are right before we go to GA. On the last question, I would say we built co-management with Pilot because that was kind of under the old thinking that getting to co-management was kind of a bridge, and we wanted you to think about Pilot and then pushing. But we've since changed that UI so that it's not. It might still use the word pilot, but it's not tied to that kind of flow. You have a lot more flexibility and to create multiple groups that have multiple different co-management flags or settings. And yes, you can leave that like that long term.
And also, it depends. If you want to co-manage everything that can be co-managed, i.e. all your Win 10 devices, you can just set it to everything. We won't try and co-manage a server, for example. There's an applicability check. So the first session went fairly deep in CIs and all that good stuff. Effectively, co-management policy is CI backed. So there's behind the scenes there is applicability that we check. So if the device is not applicable for co-management, then we won't try and co-manage the device. So if that's where that question is rooted in, you can go set it to everything and not have to worry about managing the pilot group for enablement.
All right. Will there be a lightweight hybrid console, or are you going to keep adding new? I think this is actually pretty much like a duplicate. So you got the REST APIs that you're working for more flexibility. Sounds like most things will be in the new unified admin center.
Yeah. Go tenant attach, and we'll build you a cloud console.
There we go. All right. So what is the best solution to manage remote endpoints in terms of VPN connections and software updates? So there was a blog post. It was from you, Rob. I know that you have want to say I had it up here, but basically covers a lot of those scenarios with things like split tunneling. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, split tunnel being a security risk is at best a 20-year-old misnomer. It's really rooted in previous viewpoint that, hey, my network is secure. Anything that's in my network is therefore safe. It's not really been true for a very long time. You know, customers, whether they've realized or accepted or not, have had devices coming in and out of their network. You know, going to Starbucks, going home, you know, whatever it might be. So using your network perimeter as a security perimeter is not a guaranteed way to ensure that you have full control and full security. So the recommendation would definitely be to use a split tunnel and to intelligently map traffic. The absolute recommendation would be, hey, only route traffic that you need to route on-prem. If anything's destined for the internet, just send it to the internet. There's no point backhauling it and then sending it back out again once it hits your corporate network. And I'll stick some resources in around recommendations for VPN and also recommendations for zero trust. So, you know, assuming breach and applying security on top of that to make sure that you restrict access to devices that have, you know, been attested and are valid as, you know, safe and secure. That definitely makes these kind of decisions a lot easier. But then in terms of the best solution to manage, once you've got split tunnel working and have everything in place, everything else just kind of works as you'd expect. You know, if stuff is being served on-prem, then it's going to go over the VPN regardless. But the blogs that Justin referenced take you through the various options that you have. If you go with the true split tunnel and have your VPN be able to go use the internet, we'll just go get the updates from Windows Update. You know, that's a free cloud service where Windows updates are available. Depending on VPN and security decisions, you know, you might end up being that, hey, what you need to do is use CMG, and there'll be a small egress charge for you to go download those from a small and known set of FQDNs or IP ranges. But if you fundamentally, everything is going back over your VPN, fundamentally everything is going to go back over your VPN. So that's really the starting point. And there's some good resources that came out kind of in line with the recommendations I made specifically for Configuration Manager. The Office 365 team published some guidance to take you through the recommendations for VPN. So let me dig those out and I'll stick those in the Q&A.
All right. Is there any way for Bitlocker-enabled internet-based clients to communicate with an IBCM recovery service point? Don't know if that's something you guys would know or not.
Yeah, I don't know it off the top of my head.
All right. So for that one, maybe tweet at DJammer, and maybe you can find someone from the team that may know a bit more on that.
Yeah, I can have an engineer look into that one.
All right, so how is desktop analytics going to change the game during Windows 10 servicing in regards to non-compatible apps and drivers?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to think about this is there's over 1 billion machines running Windows 10, and Microsoft gets really good insight into driver performance and driver compatibility on those machines, and some insight into application compatibility on those machines. You know, most of those are in consumer, but bringing that data back so that enterprises can use that data to stay safe and you know, not upgrade machines that aren't ready or might have issues with drivers or applications, or might even have questions about those. You know, that is kind of that engine that we're building, which is use the data that we have from all those machines to help enterprises make more automated and faster deployments in safe ways. So yeah, I think it's a huge game changer. I think we still have some technology and workflow to ship to help it tie it all together, but we're making a lot of progress. I think the next 3 months you'll see some of this big value in tech previews.
All right, so question from Teams, ConfigMgr HA question, is there anything on the roadmap to support HA with a primary site server in 3 environments?
And by environments, do we think that means like geos? Because you can have, I'm pretty sure you can have three site servers. I think you can have an active and 2 passives right now. And I think that they can be, we definitely have customers that have them running in different data centers. So I assume that's what the question is. And then the answer would be, yeah, that should work.
Right, here is another one. So Community Hub, will there be support to get Community Hub in the console on a server OS? So I believe today, if you log in with the console here, it says unable to load. So any plans to support that on server, or would that purely be Windows 10 client that you need to enable that?
They're looking at it. They just have a dependency that wasn't there on server, so they got to figure out what they're going to do.
Right, so I think that's all I had in the PowerPoint, and we're coming pretty close on time. Any thoughts from you, David, or any closing thoughts from either of you guys?
Rob, do you have any thoughts? And then I have some thoughts.
No, you go.
So, it's interesting because this morning I was reflecting on basically 5 years ago, my team was shipping the very first version of Current Branch, which was about 15.11. I think we're actually in June, so we weren't even that far yet. And I said I've been working in this code base for about 2 decades. Well, the previous time 4 releases was 2.0, which I wasn't really a part of, then 2003, 2007, 2012. And all those releases averaged about 5 years. And if you look at where we're at in Current Branch, 5 years ago, we hadn't even shipped. And so there's a lot of questions about, when will this functionality be there? When will we ship it? HA, active, for example. You think about, how fast we're shipping with previews every month and production every 4 months. If we were doing it the old way, 2003, 2007, 2012, you wouldn't even seen like the next version yet. So if you look at all the functionality, all the innovation that's in Current Branch since we shipped 15.11 till now, and then you compared it even to, say, the difference between 2007 and 2012, there's a lot of functionality and a lot of innovation that's happening. And most of that is coming from customers. It's coming from user voice. It's coming from, like, as Rob says, from tap. Customers give us good insights into how we can help solve their problems. So, for me, in a way, I have I have my dream job. I have a very exciting job where we get to drive an innovation that's customer driven, customer inspired, and delivers very quickly. 3, 6, 9, 12. Was that 15 releases in 5 years, and the next one's coming soon. So, thanks to customers. Thanks for inspiring us and giving us ideas what to go build, and keep the feedback coming. Even when it's bugs or you have to go in the console and give us a frowny face. The engineers are very anxious to know how to make their code work better. So thanks for all of you that are on the call and for the partnership of using the product and helping us make it better. It's really been a very enjoyable 5 years for sure on Current Branch. All right. Thanks, Justin, for setting this up too. It's been great.
Yeah. Thank you for attending. This was awesome. So we still have a couple questions in the comments. So we'll keep monitoring that throughout the session, and people on our team will try to answer anything that we can. But big thanks to David for attending this one. Now, next up, we're going to have Michael Niehaus, but we have been going a while. So let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. But are you here, Michael? Everything okay? You unmute, and would you be ready in 5 minutes here?
Yep, all set.
The real question for Michael is, how far has he ran today?
Yeah, I saw, what were you on, a streak of like over 2 years or something crazy?
Yeah, I haven't run yet today. I did go to the gym earlier, so. I'm not last in the list because of importance. I'm last in the list because I said I didn't want to cancel my gym appointment.
All right, so we will go ahead and pause things for about 5 minutes, and then Michael will be up next. with his session.